What stories about WW2 did your grandparents tell you, and or what did you find out about their lives during that period? My grandpa very rarely talked about it, but he was in the Pacific in WW2. He caught malaria and was sent to a hospital ship to recover, and the Japanese sunk the ship. So he floated for like 10 hours clinging to the wreckage with active malaria before finally being rescued. And after all that, he re-enlisted and fought in the Korean War also. I had a great uncle who was part of the occupying forces in Germany. He loved dogs and purchased a full-blooded German Shepherd while overseas. He couldn't keep the dog with him, so he had a German family look after the dogs. Meat was hard to come by, so every week or so, my uncle would bring the family meat to feed the dog. It was only after getting the dog home my uncle discovered the dog absolutely loved sauerkraut and didn't quite know what to do with the meat. It turns out the German family was taking the meat for the dog and eating it themselves and feeding the dog sauerkraut. Grandfather was drafted, broke his femur in basic training. Spent the entirety of WWII behind a desk in Oklahoma processing logistics and supply chain management requests. My grandfather would talk about the training time with his unit while being transported, but mostly about a little kid he was helping feed in China after Japan surrendering. He would just think aloud about what happened to him and if he was alright. He never talked about combat. I did walk into his house once, and the History Channel was on showing a USMC graveyard on Okinawa, and he was crying. My father joined the AF underage serving in New Guinea and the islands. He also used to tell me stories of the training and of the silly things they'd do to pass the time. It wasn't until we were both older that the memories started coming back, and he'd wake with nightmares. When I stayed at his house, I'd sometimes find him awake at 0300 sitting in the kitchen. It was then he'd tell me about some of the other things he'd seen. Poor bastard had kept it inside for over 50 years. My great-grandfather served in the Leningrad militia during its siege. Leningrad is now known as St. Petersburg. The Nazis severed off the city's supply lines and bombed their food storages. The blockade lasted 900 days, and the citizens basically just farmed wherever they could, while the militia combined with the Red Army held off the Nazis. The daily ration was a small piece of bread. Many people died from starvation. Everyone had a meal ticket, which you needed to receive your ration. People would steal these, and if you lost your ticket, you would lose your rations for the rest of the month. Many people died from starvation, and there were rumors of cannibalism. My great-grandpa was a scout/messenger, and he nearly died to either a bomb or a mine. After that, he received a medical discharge, but remained in the city of Leningrad. When the blockade finally ended, he weighed 39 kilograms. Scary stuff. In high school, my history teacher told us a story about his grandparents and their time during the siege of Leningrad. He said that his grandparents scraped the glue off the back of the wallpaper and made it into a oatmeal type of food. The story that sticks with me is the one about the fresh meat. His grandpa came home one day and his wife had 2 fresh fillets. This was obviously suspicious, so he asked where she got this. She said a man knocked on the door selling meats, so she traded her engagement ring for it. He took a bite of the meat to confirm his suspicions, and when he tasted that it was sweet, he knew. Apparently human meat is sweet, and there were rumors of some point people who were slicing the buttock off corpses and selling the meat to unsuspecting customers. He tracked the guy down and got the ring back. If it came between eating a dead body and dying of starvation, I'm pretty sure I would be a cannibal in that situation. But the meal salesman was wrong by not stating exactly what it is. My GF's grandfather served in Stalingrad. It left deep mental scars. He had insomnia and difficulty sleeping every night. They built a quiet room with no sound, as sometimes he would wake up to people walking and start screaming. He had a 1,000:1 chance of making it out and was deep in the shit. One night in the 80s apparently he went nuts and thought they were under attack when a car accidentally crashed outside their house. He ran outside and started screaming. The fighting in Stalingrad was among the worst in the war. People were eating the dead. didn't have weapons, and would often fight hand to hand. Were losing fingers due to the cold. They would strip the dead for their clothes as it was insanely cold in the winter. When he was awake he was the nicest guy apparently. Loved fishing. Loved his grandchildren. Just couldn't escape Stalingrad. My granduncle was part of a cleanup crew in Japan after the Battle of Leyte. So after all the fighting was done, they'd send his unit in to clear out the bodies of the fallen Japanese. He said that they would loot their bodies, take treasures like knives, swords, gold off the teeth, and then put their bodies on a giant landing craft, the kind that open up on a beach, and take them out to sea to dispose of them. He says he'll never forget watching the sharks just go to town on the dead. Haunts him to this day. Edit. This was in Philippines, not Japan. But it was a battle against the Japanese. Another edit. The intention was to give them a sea burial, since the Japanese left their dead upon retreat. It wasn't meant to desecrate the deceased further. He never said much, but he did talk once about throwing explosives of some kind in a river to catch fish. He was in the South Pacific as a Marine. I just remembered another one. He did not smoke, so he traded his cigarettes till he had enough for a typewriter, so he could type his letters to his wife and my mom, his daughter, who was born after he went to war. My grandfather was a kid during WW2. He was born in 1931. He lived in Rugenwald, which used to be part of Germany. Today it's Poland, near the city of Szczecin. His dad had to fight for the Nazis, even though they were not particularly fond of their ideas. My grandfather had to go to Hitler Youth, where they would make all sorts of week-long trips through forests, learn how to handle guns, etc. He wasn't able to visit school for some time due to Germany losing the war. My great-grandfather obviously fought the Russians on the Eastern Front, but he was captured on a mission in Russia and kept as a war prisoner. When he had a really bad lung infection, and it was becoming clearer that Germany will be losing this war, he was released from prison and was able to spend 3 more days with his family before he passed. Then it was my grandfather's turn to try and earn some money, as he was the only son they had and his mum had to take care of his youngest sister. When Russia took over the whole area, they gave the Germans in the area the chance to leave for Western Germany. They provided one train and said whoever could get on there was free to go, the rest would stay there. My grandfather made sure that his family got on the train, but he didn't have any space himself, so he rode the train by standing on a metal bar thing that connects 2 train wagons for part of the journey. Luckily the train didn't run too fast. Once Hitler came to my grandfather's hometown earlier in the wartime, and he said everyone was so excited to see this man. People literally camped by the train tracks to await his train. Apparently he came by train for some reason. There's plenty more. Since my granddad basically had to flee his hometown and had never returned, he asked me and my dad, his son, to take him there a couple years back, since he would love to see how it's turned out. He was already over 80 years old. Of course we were happy to go, and we spent 9 days there. Some of it was quite emotional for him, and he told me many stories of his childhood. It was really interesting to hear his point of view, as he was a child for the most part. My great-grandfather never talked about the war until he had his stroke. We knew he had a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, but we didn't know how he got them. He was just a private, and he'd had enough of the military when the war was over. After the stroke, he seemed to loosen up. He laughed about sighting rifles in by shooting at chickens. He showed us pictures of him in front of the Eiffel Tower. Turns out he was occupation force. Ended up occupying an area near Berlin that became involved in the Battle of the Bulge. Apparently, while he was fighting, some sort of explosive blew off his buddy's leg, so Grandpa did what anyone else would do and threw his buddy over his shoulder to get him to the med tent. This included running across a field in the line of sight of a German machine gun nest. He was shot in the leg and some more shrapnel ended up in his chest. Somehow, Grandpa and his buddy survived. We thought he was embellishing it, but the Bronze Star paperwork included a report that we found after he passed away. 2 higher-ups signed that the story was true, so I guess I have to believe it. He told us it wasn't that big of a deal, and that he didn't deserve all those medals for what he did. What a badass. R.I.P. Gramps. Edit. Words edit 2. People are pointing out that this battle didn't happen in Berlin. He never said Berlin, just Germany. I said Berlin, because I'm not good at history. Sorry.